everyone, welcome to another Underrated Film Saturday. I'm so sorry that this video is going to be posted late. I've been fairly busy this week, so sometimes these videos have to get pushed to the side, but I will always catch up, and I'm trying to catch up today with the latest ones. So without further ado, let me discuss a underrated film, at least in my opinion, and that film is called Big Fish, directed by Tim Burton. Now, the interesting thing about this film, and why I think it is sort of pushed under the bus, is because it's not the traditional Tim Burton film that we usually see. It's not really that dark. It's not hokey. It doesn't address similar themes that I think a lot of other Tim Burton films have focused on. It doesn't really have a huge, elaborate, goofy setup, and it's rather simplistic in trying to provide a sense of optimism, and I don't think a lot of Tim Burton films really focused in on that, or in particular family and family dilemmas. So I think that's something that this film really tries to dive into, and I think does a good job of doing so. But in order for you to understand what the story is about, basically Big Fish revolves around Edward Bloom, who's played by Ewan McGregor. And Edward Bloom, as we will see in the beginning, is an old man, but we do see him basically go into flashback mode and basically reiterate stories about his life. Or at least we see these stories sort of reiterated, and stories that he's told other people, in particular his son. And you will also see how his son, as a result of Edward telling these stories, distances himself from his father, because a lot of these stories that Edward tells are very nonsensical. They don't make a whole lot of sense, and they're kind of like fairy tales, what he talks about. And his son is not really all that comfortable with it, because his son lives in the very rational world, and he doesn't understand how his father can tell these like really elaborate stories, and he thinks that a lot of the things that he says are just very exaggerated, and he thinks that some of them are lies or not necessarily true into what he's addressing, because they're just so out there. Basically, the film shows Edward, because again, most of the film's within flashback mode. We see Edward as a younger man living in this southern town in the 50s. And at least I think it's the 50s. And we do see him going on these like little adventures. And these adventures are very based in I think folklore, and really largely about creating a fairy tale, because as you will see, a lot of these tales have very sort of, I guess you could say, somewhat supernatural elements, like, you know, like this witch who can, you know, see how you're going to die through her eye. You know, just this really, really tall man, this giant, you know, there's all these kinds of things that are incorporated in that do resemble a fairy tale or a story. And the interesting thing about the film is it tries to put in a little bit of that southern culture, because we see Edward growing up in that culture, and it's interesting to see someone going through this surrounding and then having these kinds of fairy tale aspects incorporated into it. And I think that's what makes the film really unique and creative. And I think rather unique compared to a lot of other Tim Burton films, because usually a lot of other Tim Burton films focus on a very distinct style, But I think this film was trying to be something different and all on its own. And I think it stands out in that sense. But I think that's also another reason why it's underrated, because nobody would think that Tim Burton would do this. But Edward Bloom as a character is very likable. You can say he does have this flaw again with his son that I mentioned earlier. You know, he's not the same like his like his son. They think a lot differently, and you know, and Edward just has this very childlike mentality. He's very upbeat and go-lucky and full of energy, and his son is a little bit more rational and calmer, and you know, you do see sort of the different personalities that they have and how you think that would clash. But really, it's the film itself is really about Edward's life. It's about the different things that he went through in his life, and sort of the things that really impacted him, and the people that came into his life. So it's really a story about bringing out this optimism of going out and seeing the world, you know, and embracing whatever comes to you, you know, and there's just something so likable about that aspect. And I think that is something that a lot of Disney fairy tales liked to incorporate, this sense of optimism. And I think Edward is sort of a representation of that optimistic character who goes out there and he finds what he wants out of life, and he goes and pursues that, and he ends up finding a sense of happiness and a sense of belonging, and you know, and in and of itself, it's not only a story about life, but also about death. I think Tim Burton has focused a little bit more on death as opposed to life, but I like how this film really ties in both. It brings in these two elements that are a part of life, and takes them and uses them in a way that I think gets the audience invested, and allows for the story to really progress and provide something unique. And again, this film is not for everyone. I'm not going to say that everybody's going to come away enjoying this film, because again, it does have a lot of weird stuff that happens, and a lot of it is a little bit nonsensical. And I think that might bother some people, because they might feel that not a whole lot is explained. And I do understand that element, that again, some things are not as explained, as they're not as much explained as maybe they should. But I think that leaves it open to a little bit of interpretation, because I think with this story, it's really about what's in Edward's mind. Not so much about reality or trying to create a real world of what actually his life was like, but I guess what his life felt like through his perspective. And I think a lot of it's sort of it's sort of designed that way, you know, especially I think when all of us go through life, we think through things in maybe a more nonsensical sense than maybe what they really are, because, you know, we're the only ones experiencing ourselves. So I think it only makes sense that maybe sometimes we exaggerate certain things, and, you know, we're not maybe as clear as to what happened exactly, and, you know, everybody has their own interpretation of what they thought of a certain circumstance. So it kind of ties in that element too, because you do see how his son and Edward in particular clash, because they do have these different personalities, of Edward being a little bit more social, polite, likable, approachable, and his son is a little bit more rational, not as I think, not as optimistic as his father is. And so you do see these two different personalities sort of going in on one another, and you feel like in a way Edward never really grew up. He was always a child and always had that childlike wonder within him, and his son never maintained that. And you really do see how those things really make it difficult for family members to relate to each other. But I think, though, that's really ultimately all I can say about this film without giving anything away. It's interesting to see the Southern culture being incorporated into this fairy tale-like world. There's other parts of the film that are a bit hokey, yes. Are there certain people who are not going to appeal to this film? Absolutely, and I totally understand that. But I think that this film is rather unique, and I think if you definitely enjoy Tim Burton, if you enjoy films that are a little bit less, if you can accept a little bit of irrationality within your film, then this is one of these films that I think we can take you in. And I think the messages within the film are really, really powerful and can be very identifiable for a lot of people. So I would say definitely a movie worth considering. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day, week, month, and year. And I will be making the next video right now. And then we should be all caught up. Yay. Alrighty, but until then,